I was with him in the barn, and he opened up his kit bag, and it got, shall we say, implements with him that weren't force issue, and a bottle of holy water that he'd got from his local village church. But it's probably the only time that during my career within the Lincolnshire Police, that I've been asked to investigate a werewolf.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the last transmission. And we've got one that's slightly different today, Chris, and everybody who's listening, because we've got a report from a police officer, be it a retired police officer, but nonetheless one with many years in the service. And I get lots of reports from police officers, Coast Guard, former military, and usually I have to change names, not on every occasion, but, at times I do. He's given us his first-hand account, and he's actually telling us it's not me relaying the story for once. And it involves a stakeout, of all things, 6 police officers around a remote farmhouse or cottage close to the former RAF Swinderby. And they claim that the occupants of the cottage, a lady and her young daughter, I think it's a teenage daughter, are having trouble with a werewolf, of all things, bothering them. What do you think?
As you say, I mean, you take many sightings, and there's a lot that you can't talk about. So we're lucky, really, on this occasion that Andy, because I can use his name, has given us permission to actually show and talk about this case. And it's not the only encounter that Andy's had actually in the force. So although, a good friend of mine and yours, Dean Cooling, also gave us his encounter. He's a former police officer in the armed unit, and he had a cryptid encounter as well, and he actually saw it. This one's quite a unique case. I've never heard anything like this. So, yeah, guys, I'd be interested in the comments to let us know what you think about this one. It's a fascinating case, so I hope you enjoy it.
Fascinating is the word, Chris. And like you said, Dean Cooling, and he actually saw whatever it was that interacted with him that night. I know other police officers that have had not similar experiences, but UFO type experiences, and some have had what we will call this unknown fear descend on them. And if I actually labelled the village, people, it would automatically take some people to this officer, to be honest with you, because it's quite a small location where he lives. But yeah, we've got lots of reports, but it's great to have an actual face of a retired police officer telling us the story.
Yeah, and what I like about it is that Andy's very descriptive, and that he's not going to add any, there's not going to be any sprinkles of sensationalism in there, like, some people can tend to do within this genre. I like the fact that Andy's been very straight with what he saw. He's not jumping to any conclusions. I don't think they did. Even though, interestingly, one of the members on the force had a very different opinion about what was going on. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
In 1988, I was a serving police officer with Lincolnshire Police, and at this time I was on a task force unit. Part of the unit's responsibility was to, as and when required, to carry out covert surveillance and covert operations as and when required. I recall this incident occur in either late November, early December of 1988, and it involved a prowler at an isolated farmhouse on the Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire border, close to RAF Swinderby. Apparently, the female occupant and her teenage daughter were being harassed on a nightly basis by a prowler that, according to the female occupant, was howling outside the property like a werewolf. She was having taps at the windows, scratching on doors, this constant mournful howling, which was really distressing them. From what I understand, each time they called for the police to attend, obviously by the time the units had got there, in bearing in mind the property's location, whoever was causing these problems had disappeared. Her husband, who worked away in the Middle East, wasn't satisfied with how the police were dealing with it and escalated the matter in the form of a complaint to the chief constable, which resulted in my unit being involved. We all laughed when we were briefed by our sergeant, and we just assumed that it was just a normal prowler. But obviously, you know, we were taking this very seriously because the woman and her daughter were very distressed and distraught. We drove down to the property on the first night using plain pool vehicles. These were just run-of-the-mill vehicles that Lincolnshire police used to buy from auctions to use on these surveillance. They were no different to any other car on the road, and as such they couldn't be sort of identified as a police vehicle. I remember we travelled down in two cars, one which we parked outside the farmhouse, the other which we secreted away in a barn. There were 6 of us on the unit, including our sergeant. 2 were stationed within the house, and the remainder of us were in locations around the property, sort of in outbuildings, and completely out of sight of anybody that would attend the house. The first night went without any incident. Nothing happened at all. My sergeant, he had gone into the house the first night, and when we left, sort of 1:30, 2 in the morning, we were briefed, and he gave us a bit of more of an update of what had been happening. He confirmed that the woman was in a very, very distressed state over what had happened in the previous weeks. She recounted to him that on numerous occasions this prowler had been howling, you know, around her property, and the way she described it to my sergeant was like a werewolf off of one of the films. You know, there's this mournful howl and this constant tapping and scratching at the doors, and the lady, quite rightly, was completely terrified. As I say, the first night passed without incident, and the second night passed without incident. But what was really sort of disturbing, one of my colleagues on the unit, he was a really down-to-earth guy. I was with him in the barn, and he opened up his kit bag, and he'd got, shall we say, implements with him that weren't force issue, and a bottle of holy water that he'd got from his local village church. I can remember saying he was quite disturbed, and he kept saying there's something not right with this. And being a group of lads, you know, we sort of all laughed at him. You know, we thought it was hilarious that he turned up with bits and bobs to combat something that he believed it was, rather than being just a prowler. Anyway, on the third night we got there at the usual time, sort of early evening, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening. Took up our various positions in and around the property. It got to about, I think it was the early hours of the morning, and there was the lads inside radioed or sent out a message saying that they'd heard either tapping or a bang on one of the doors of the property. I think it was the side door, which was not particularly within our sort of field of view from where we were. We rushed out of the barn, leaving our location, to the side of the property where the taps were heard, and there was nobody there. We did have surveillance equipment with us. We scanned the area, couldn't see a thing. We called on a dog handler that was also on standby. He attended the property, and with his dog picked up a scent trail around the side door of the house where this banging had been, and subsequently with one of my other colleagues set off across one of the fields. After about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, he returned to the farmhouse to say that the dog had picked up a really good scent trail and it was pulling really hard across the field. He said they'd got probably about 3/4 of the way across the field, and suddenly the dog had lost the scent. From what I was told, there were no dikes or anything like that could have interrupted the trail. The trail had just gone dead. We all gathered back at the property, had another briefing. By this time it was getting to about sort of 2:30 in the morning. We decided that it was probably futile in remaining there for the rest of the evening. Obviously, responding to the tapping at the window would have alerted anybody to our presence being there. We returned again the following evening, and again it was just it was just dead. Nothing happened at all. And I think the following evening after that, again, nothing happened. It was a completely quiet evening. Again, it was a crisp, frosty night. Obviously, my sergeant had made reports to his duty inspector, and I think after the 6th night, because nothing had happened other than on the 3rd night, the operation was called off from our respect, because we'd put quite a bit of man hours into it without having anything. We were told a week or two after that nothing further had happened, and as far as I'm aware, the prowler, I don't know whether he'd been disturbed or realised that we were watching the property, but all incidents surrounding this house stopped after our sort of intervention there. Obviously nobody was arrested at the time, but I think our presence there resolved the matter. But it's probably the only time that during my career within the Lincolnshire Police, that I've been asked to investigate a werewolf. The daughter and the lady of the house, as I say, when we spoke to them, were convinced that whoever or whatever it was wasn't just somebody prowling. They were seriously concerned and seriously thought that it was something more than just somebody pestering them. I remember there was a suggestion that the son of a local farmer may have been responsible, but we never had anything to prove this. The farm that he lived in was in the opposite direction from what the dog handler followed the scent trail. So whoever left the property that night headed away from the farmhouse where the suspected lad was. So I don't know. But it was a really eerie sort of job. There was just something about it that didn't feel right. I've been on loads of jobs, where we've been to prowlers, and you just, it was just a prowler. It just didn't seem right. As I say, the night when the lads in the house heard the tapping or banging on the door, we responded, very, very quickly to that side of the property, and there was just nobody there, and it was sort of open field. Other than the outbuildings, it was just open fields around the house. There was nowhere for anybody to go. They must have moved very, very quick. That's all I can say, because, as I say, we had powerful searchlights with us, night vision equipment. We didn't see anybody. I suppose there's always the chance that it could have been something banging on the window other than a person. Possibly a bird or something had flown into it. I don't know. But I just can't explain why we didn't identify somebody that evening, because I say our response to this report of the banging on the window was really, really quick. But that's it. There's not a lot more I can say other than yes, we didn't find the person, and no, we didn't see a werewolf.
Okay, what do you think to that then, Chris?
Well, I think it's a fascinating case in the sense that what's interesting about it is that, not that I have no experience of the police. I've got a lot of friends who are in the police, but I find it interesting that this case even got a unit out to it, given the nature of it. Do you not think so? I think it's. Andy could probably tell us more about that.
Absolutely, and not only that, 6 officers over 3 days. That's a lot of man hours, and obviously, it's keen to stress this lady and her teenage daughter were very frightened and distressed, but 6 officers over 3 nights, should we say, and they were placed in and around this property that was in a remote location. It kind of makes you wonder. And what I found fascinating, and I'm sure you've got a little bit more to add to this, but what I found fascinating was they were there that quick after they'd had some kind of interaction, after this thing had been tapping on the window or banging or tapping on the door. That will say this thing, it could be a person. I like the way that Andy's put this over, because in no way is he saying that he saw a werewolf, but it's the strangest of accounts that these ladies were absolutely convinced. But where it throws it into the realms of high strangeness for me, a little bit, is the tracker dog got into the middle of a field or a meadow and just lost the scent. Where did it go?
Yeah, and also the fact that I don't think I like to think that if a human, a person, a man or a woman was howling outside in the neighborhood, I think personally you can tell there's a clear distinction between something unearthly, which is the way they kind of described it, that sort of haunting howl, and obviously they were very sincere. There's no way that if they weren't sincere enough, there's no way that the police, even back in, is this the 90s, did Andy say?
1988. 1988.
Or even, so back in the late 80s, obviously the police had more resources, but that's not the point. The point being is they must have been so sincere and they must have been absolutely very authentic about what it is they were hearing. If I just don't see the police committing resources like that out to, if they just thought some kid was out there messing around, I just don't see that.
Some I don't know, some teenager or young adult who's, I don't know, took a shine to this lady's daughter or the lady of the property herself. You don't, and it's still not the kind of behavior that you'd expect a prowler to start doing. That's not that kind of behavior is kind of snooping and looking through windows, not howling and tapping on windows and scratching at doors. It's all animalistic, and I think, didn't Andy describe it as a mournful howling?
Yeah.
And we know that, without sensationalizing this, the word werewolf sort of conjures up all sorts of things, but we can't get away from the fact that they were staked out on this property, looking for an intruder, but the essence of what they were there for was because there'd been reports of a werewolf.
Yeah, very, even as a prowler, if his intention was something like, I don't know, that sort of old school stalking, peeping Tom sort of thing, the last thing he would want to be doing is drawing attention to himself by howling at the top of his voice outside.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not what was his intention, or what was the intention of whatever this was. And as you said earlier, the fact that they had night vision equipment, high powered lights, binoculars, everything that you would need, surveillance equipment to find somebody, and they were literally right upstairs and in the adjacent barns to get out there and capture this person or prowler, and nothing in sight. It's just really strange.
6 officers with the best equipment, I would think, that they'd got of the day. It's 1988, but but like you said, night vision equipment, and fast response when they get radioed through from wherever it is inside property. It's here. There's something outside this side door. And he said they're literally there. You know, they'll have been on the tours. They'll have been fit men back in 1988. We're getting this story from a retired police officer. But back in the day, they wouldn't have been like slow on the feet, I wouldn't think, yet they found nothing. What's that telling us? I mean, and plus the fact it's a remote area. Where's this person gone from? Where's this person come from? You know, and Andy was keen to stress as well towards the end of this story that he's told us, that when the police tracker dog was looking for the scent and it found nothing in this field or meadow, the farmhouse where they thought, or the nearest farmhouse, let me correct myself, where they thought this young farmer's son or somebody potentially who could have been responsible was in the opposite direction. So, you know, he's leaving himself wide open if it was just a normal type person. I just find it fascinating. I know as a channel for unexplained phenomena, we like the fact that somebody's telling a story like this, but you can't distract from the fact that 6 officers just could get nowhere near whoever this was.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Of course, because of the nature of our channel, I suppose that some of the audience might think that we're trying to push it in that direction. All we're doing is asking, I think, just relevant and pertinent questions about same as Andy has, really. Yeah. He was there, but I also like the interesting part about one of his colleagues pulled the bag of whole, you know, with
holy water. And Andy was sort of delicate with his wording, you know, items that we wouldn't use in a police force as police officers to apprehend this assailant, this intruder. So what he'd got in his bag, I don't know, and he never said, and it's perhaps just as well, but it quite amusing, but startling that this man had gone with that intention. And you heard Andy say, I'd been on many stakeouts, with prowlers and intruders, and this just didn't feel right. You know, gut feeling, go with the gut.
Yeah, really interesting case. And of course, there is a slight caveat and another interesting element to this case, which Andy wrote to you about a while ago, and you featured it in Truth Proof 4. So tell us about that.
Well, this is correct. So that we may just open the door on another account. This all depends on Andy. But Truth Proof 4, wherever that book is, apologies, people. Andy first got in touch with me years ago to tell me that he'd had a frightening experience whilst working within the police. And that experience involved him and another officer driving down an area in Lincolnshire. Was it Lincolnshire?
Yeah.
And that experience involved Andy and another officer driving down a lane called Tilbridge Lane in Lincolnshire. And unbelievably, they'd just been on the job, the stakeout for the Werewolf. And I think you looked at this, Chris, and is it 14 or 15 miles away from the location or thereabouts? And this shape, like a lozenge, just crossed the road. Some grey shape, which Andy did a marvellous painting of, which he might allow us to show. And they crossed the road, but interestingly, it filled both officers with fear and dread. They didn't intend stopping the car to get out. I'm not going to elaborate any more on this because we might be lucky enough to get Andy to tell us this one as well. Was it connected to the Werewolf stakeout? I personally think it might have been. I have to say that Andy had not connected that before, and I think in his heart of hearts, he still doesn't think it's connected. But when we talk about things now, Chris, such as the Hitchhiker effect, where people who've been experienced or immersed in some kind of episode of extreme high strangeness, and then they take this phenomena back with them, I wonder whether that were connected.
It does make you think, because we've got to look at this, at things like this, events like this, with fresh eyes now, I think, because of, that's the name that's been given, the Hitchhiker effect. I think it's quite apt, personally. It's interesting. I mean, look, if you're going to look at it as a coincidence, what are the chances, first of all, of even being on a werewolf stakeout, which is what Andy called it, which is what it was, really. I mean, you could werewolf / prowler stakeout. and then on the way home, you encounter a UFO, or we'll call it a UFO. I guess that's what it's a UFO, isn't it? I suppose. It just seems. I mean, what are the chances? Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're very slim, and you know, and I think I would even use the term what he described it as UFO. I think we'd use that loosely. It's about 3 foot deep, 6 to 8 foot long, lozenge shaped mist, but a solid shape crossing the road, and then to instill so much fear in these men.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'd have been absolutely frightened, sat in a barn, waiting for something, or my colleague rang and said there's something at the door, or there's something tapping at the window, and you have to go out into the night, no street lights, nothing. You're in a remote area, and you know the potential. Even if you don't believe in any of this, it's just got to make you twitch a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's certainly now. I think knowing what we know, back now, I suppose, yeah, you definitely would be twitchy. But I suppose his mate didn't help pulling out the holy water. That
Absolutely,
interesting.
So the second story may follow, guys, but that's what we've got for now.
Yeah, so let us know, guys, what you think about that case in the comments. We really appreciate Andy coming forward with that, and he's did a really good job, and telling the story as well, which I think is key to it to any witness account. If you're lucky enough to have the witness, and Andy's, tells the story very well, I think, and I like the fact he didn't embellish it. You're getting, which is what I like about a lot of witnesses. In fact, it's very rare nowadays that I've not encountered a witness that embellishes things. Have you recently? I seem to...
Not recently, and you do get a feel for it, but this man isn't. I mean, true to his word, and he's not saying that this was a werewolf. Saying he's giving us a breakdown of what he was there for, and these ladies firmly believed that's what was responsible for these terrifying episodes that they'd been enduring for I think he said 3 weeks previous. And obviously one of the police officers thought there was something more to it. Andy doesn't elaborate and doesn't say there were. He did say it was highly unusual and it was different to the normal, or it had a different feel to it to the normal stakeouts, where, if stakeout's the word, to the normal surveillance of an intruder or somebody that's up to no good in the early hours of the morning.
Yeah, we've got to remember, I think Andy says it himself at the end, that nothing happened ultimately. No. Regardless of that, still really interesting and, peculiar. And then you add on these encounters on the way home, and then it becomes even more peculiar. So as a whole, it's really interesting, potentially. So yeah, hopefully, like you say, we'll get Andy to tell us about
the second installment.
Yes, the second installment. Yeah. So yeah, guys, look out for that. We'll do our best to facilitate that, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thank you.